it's true. Okay. Makes it particularly special that we have an alcohol-slinging robot. I don't know if you got a chance. We have sorry, story of my life. I got a Bender Rodriguez. I highly recommend it. Well made by the robot and inebriate. Anyway, yes, here at Nerd Night, the drinking is as important as the learning. It's all of a piece as we get together, have some fun, and learn some interesting things. My name is Rebecca Cohen. I am co-boss. I work with this guy, Rick Karneski. He didn't want to come up to the stage right now, but he is my co-boss. Story. I just want to tell you, it basically started in Boston with this very sober and distinguished looking fellow, Chris. He was gay, and as many PhD students do, he drank now and then, and he would go to the bar. But then every summer he would go to Cameroon for the purpose of studying the verb. But no, parasites. And then when the native, nature, so we go to his favorite about the fucking birds. And, you know, we're going to do one night, you're going to do a little spiel, you'll tell everybody about the birds, and the eggs, and the parasites, and it'll be done with. And that's how Nerd Night was born. And although it didn't happen instantly, it did spread. Nerd Night spread from Boston, New York, to cities all over the United States and other continents. We're really big in Germany. And not just, there's other overseas Nerd Nights too. So if you have friends in any of the cities here, let them know. And of course, eventually came here to the East Bay. Rick was really the founder. I joined in after a couple months because the co-founder graduated from Cal and flew away to other things. And we're here every month at Club 21. Last Monday of the month, we have 3 awesome speakers who talk about super nerdy topics. Like tonight, we have these 3 awesome speakers talking about these 3 nerdy topics. It's going to be really great. So our first speaker is going to be Mary Roach. You may have heard her. She is a science writer who writes great books. And tonight she's going to be talking about warfare and the science of warfare. And so this reminded me of a probably apocryphal story that you may have heard of about this guy. It's very familiar, Napoleon, and his Russian invasion and retreat of 1812. So you may have heard the story, maybe not. But what's well known is that Napoleon invaded Russia during the winter, and they wound up retreating. It was miserable. Dudes. They lost. People have speculated that related to the buttons on the uniforms, which could have been made out of tin. And tin, it turns out, is subject to a phenomenon known as tin pest. When it reaches low enough temperature from a nice hard metal into a brittle, non-metallic, gray powder, basically. I'm not a material scientist like Rick. Solid, shiny white metal. So there's that. This is what really contributed to Napoleon's defeat and the massive attrition of troops as he retreated from Russia, because their tin buttons literally just like disintegrated, and their uniforms fell off and they just froze. So is it true? Yeah, no, probably not. Yeah, I'm that kind of nerd. I'm not like, I looked it up. It's unlikely that that's really what happened. What probably, it's not impossible. In like 2002, they exhumed some soldiers and their buttons were still intact. So it's not happening. But the point. The point is that into warfare. And if you don't think about things like what material your buttons are made from, you could really be fucked.
Thank you. Okay. We will get to this later. It says Nicasio Valley Cheese Company on the bag, but it's not cheese. It's not cheese. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping before I forget, because I'm going to get very distracted and involved in that. I'll be signing books afterwards, and I have a special sales incentive for you. This is made in San Leandro, California. All of the U.S. combat rations toilet paper comes from San Leandro. I went and I saw this machine. They call it the King Kong toilet paper roll. Anyway, so I ordered, and I had little stickers made, which I felt was a nice double entendre. So I have a lot of these. You buy a copy of the book. The topic of this evening is, and a gentleman named Stanley Lovell, who's the director of Joy, his job a lot. He came up with all the gadgets. You pop it open, there's a compass. Came up with all, this was for in China. And the idea was to have a device that you could put into the hands of these people, these motivated civilians. And what it was, foul-smelling bomb, but not a bomb. And so that was a German or Japanese officer letting citizens contribute a little bit to the this fire smell. And that's not as straightforward as that smells. A lot of it is context. For example, you deli, say late at night after you've been in a bar, that is the smell of vomit. So similarly, trimethylamine can register to the nose, to the brain, as either fishy or vaginal. And the guy that was hired to come up with the chemical to be used in this stink spray, he had a nice comment. He said, trimethylamine, yes, pleasant or unpleasant according to circumstances. So they wanted to find some foul-smelling, regardless of context, that they could squirt on officers' uniforms. And Lovell's original idea, he says, this is a quote from, I found the file, the OSS archives. I have the file. It's labeled "Who Me." The a smell suggests. So it would just smell. It would. And this was, classified. All the pages say secret, and now it's been declassified. So then, okay, but what they ended up going with, the people they hired, the chemical company that was hired, the Arthur Little Company, Ernst Crocker, because that warning system, and if you can't identify a bad smell, you don't know that it's safe. So it's actually, it's scary as the Arthur Little valeric acid. They had to figure out deployment, they did a lot of quality control testing. Maryland Research Labs was brought in, and I felt very bad for the people at Maryland Research Labs. They basically just test it, make sure they were squirtable 2-inch lead tubes. Even just unscrewing the cap, wrote a Major John Jeffries of the OSS, it was impossible to prevent getting some of the liquid on my hand. They had a lot of these ordered, and they were in a hurry, and so they put the shield. And even that was not good. And this is my favorite quote in the whole Who Me file. They said, the hand shields conferred protection only when, quote, one squirts from a horizontal position. And I assumed that they meant the tube is horizontal, but it kind of sounded like the operator might be in a horizontal position. Anyway, the whole thing was, they were never deployed. The final report for Who Me came out 17 days before the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. So it was 2 years of effort, and nothing ever came of it. And now we're going to fast forward to 1998. The Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Directorate commissioned Monell Chemical Senses Center to make a universal malodorant. That is a stink so awful to anybody, anywhere in the world, that it can be used to clear a room, clear a compound that you're trying to get into, disperse a mob. And they wanted something that would be, in any culture, revolting, which is not that easy. As Pam Dalton, who's the researcher, found, she traveled around the world with little bottles in her carry-on luggage labeled sewage, burnt hair, vomit, and U.S. government standard bathroom malodor. And she traveled around the world and had people say, is this pleasant, unpleasant, frightening, not frightening, edible, wearable? And this is from her paper, 20% of Caucasians, Asians, and black South Africans considered sewage to smell edible. And 3% of Caucasians would wear vomit as found it a wearable scent. In other words, like So the one that everyone hated was U.S. government standard bathroom malodor, and that was an odor that was designed in World War II for testing latrine deodorizers. So they needed a standardized, horrible scent that mimicked the smell of a field latrine hundreds of men had been using on a hot afternoon, many afternoons, that had been sitting there. So that's what that smell is, and that was the winner. And then what they did, this is their little secret addition, because when you smell a new odor, you tend to be kind of tentative. You kind of take a tentative sniff. So the top note on this concoction, they added this fruity top note. So you take a little whiff, just a little whiff, and you're like, oh, that's nice. And then on the keeper inhale, you get this whiff of U.S. government standard bathroom malodor. So the combination of U.S. government standard bathroom malodor plus the fruity stuff, it's known as stench soup. You know how this is. This is not just put into a box. She says, we have put it in a bottle, in another glass bottle that is filled with activated charcoal. We have triple contained this in another vessel, which is filled with activated charcoal. So you can or about her shot opening it here. Everybody wants to open it there. So maybe I should do that. I don't know. Because about opening it here. I don't want to get sued. Just open one layer. Should we open one layer? All right. Time limit? Activated charcoal. Whoa. Whoa. The inner sanctum. And experience this? Should I open it? All right. You want to come up? Come up, come up. I don't want to do this alone. Are you ready?
I'm stretching a lot.
Okay, perfect. Okay, remember there's the fruity. Deeper inhale.
I don't think I got past the fruity top note.
No, it's weird. This is actually like a potpourri. It's not. I think it sat in my closet too long.
Stir it up.
It smells like one of
clearly changed. Wow. All right, well, okay. All right, well, I will leave this up here for anybody who wishes to. All right, thanks. That's it for me. Oh, yeah, the smell is more disgusting than the smell. All right. I can't really see. Is that Mr.
How do you come up with the subject of your book?
Idea for that we put something in one book that leads to an idea for the next book. For Bong, it was this moment that you dream of, where you read one sentence, you go, "There's my next book." It was a description of Masters and Johnson, and it was in Film Quarterly, and it said the colposcopic films of Masters and Johnson. I was like, colposcopic? Is that a cervical sampling kind of? Does that mean they made a film inside a woman who's sexually responding? Woo! Sex research, that went not like crowdsourcing here. Give me like enough. But anyway, that's. Any other? This is such an anticlimax. My God, stench soup. What the hell happened? I'm kind of relieved because I was afraid I was going to get into the ventilation system.
What about twin smells?
There was actually, he was a microencapsulation expert, and he had this idea that you could microencapsulate. Because scratch and sniff is a microencapsulation technique. When you scratch it, it releases the. You spread that over. Say you have the enemy sort of pinned down, and they've been stuck there, and they don't have good food, and they're lonely and miserable. And you drop this powder and microencapsulate the smell of mom's home-baked bread, and they would come out and step on it and do their exercises or whatever, and they'd smell it, and then they'd be like, "I've had it. I'm going home." And the war would end. It's kind of my favorite military technology ever imagined. Alas, it was never made. Yeah.
Yeah, so your books famously sort of don't shy away from whatever topic, some of some things you do is on topic.
I couldn't because it was during the drawdown in Afghanistan. But I have to say, there was a moment when I found out, because I made it partway through the process, and they said, and then you need to buy some body armor. I'm like, really? I have to buy it? It was just a reporter, you're like, I'll just be tagging along. So that kind of gave me pause, and there were people in my world who were like, no, I don't really think we should do this. But then it was all movement. ISAF said no. But that did give me a little bit of pause, yeah. Way back there, yeah. The strange. I cross a line. It takes a lot for me to cross a line, but there was a section in Bong. I went to Egypt to talk to this guy, Ahmed Shafiq, who I went there to see him. Well, he did some sex-related studies, but the main reason I went is because he'd done this paper on the effect of heat on sperm count, and for this study he had little polyots. And his paper said, figure 1, the underpant worn by the rat. And I'm going to Egypt. I don't know who this guy is. I don't know if he's for real or what his situation, but I'm going to go. So I did go, and he said, okay, reflexes. And he had this male nurse who was standing on a bed, and Dr. Shafiq had one of those pointers, the little silver pointer, and he goes, I'll be showing you the anal, which you scratch along the side of the anus and it winks. Goes like that. So he did this. And I was like, it's right at eye level because the guy is standing up and it winks. And on Easter, there are these sugar eggs with a little window, a little round in the chicks. And I flashed on that and I wrote this whole scene. And my editor just crossed it out and said, no. But, yes, right in the white shirt?
What
Yeah.
was it in childhood that made you so curious about the world? More curious.
I don't know why everybody isn't curious about this shit. I mean, you all are, right? Are they, more nerds is what the world needs. Want the world to find this stuff interesting. I do run across them sometimes. I found your book kind of weird. Yes.
Which book did you have the most fun making?
Packing for Mars was really fun specifically because I got to go on the Vomit Comet, and that has been a dream my whole life, to be weightless, to float like a soap bubble. Get yourself to Las Vegas where you can buy a seat on one of these. And you have 22 seconds. There's this ad that I'm going on the Vomit Comet. I'm going to just build a book around this. 2 more questions. 2 more questions. Do we even have 2 more? Yeah. Does mellification exist? I sure hope that it did exist. It sounds so the Chinese were stiff. It was a method to preserve it, and then they put a date on it. It's been a while. Medicinal item, not like a baklava, for instrument to mellified man. But I hope that it did. Just because it's interesting. Okay, last. Yes, right in the middle. It worked. I was gonna just like cap it up really, because when I the center, and the scene is in the book, and they open it, and then the researcher Pam Dalton says to the guy, "Put it on the hood." I said, "Well, seriously, it gets into the ventilation system." That was I just had an expiration date that you kind of have to. But my exit strategy was going to be to just bolt for the nearest and get outside. Anyway, all right. So thanks.
So thanks to Mary. Mary's going to be at the back table where Books Inc. is from Alameda, and she is signing copies of her new book. Also back there is a bartending robot, so if you have not yet had a robotic named cocktail, you should probably grab one. You should also totally make a shitty-ass robot, also near the back, the winner of the shitty-ass robot CD, courtesy of me. Also back there is the Oakland Public Library. They list a bunch of great events. They have marathon to learn stuff. We're going to be back in 15 with JKG Lopez Alt. He's going to talk to us about statements. also this one. I like our because they're science talks, although so he's Count Rumford, and if you're Count Rumford, apparently if you end up with one, the best thing is in size, already on his side, mutton over a fire versus using a potato dehydrator to do it. Count Rumford actually invented I told milk makes coffee cool slower. So if you like hot coffee, you should put milk in it. I'm not going to do that this time. So I like this Smith & Cross. It's a Navy proof rum that's sitting on that screen over there. To 200 grams of ice. Anyone have guesses about how cold my delicious Navy proof rum would be? Room temperature, cold. I'll give you a little. The freezers can get. Some people, they're like have lower melting points. This is the same way that salt is good. It turns out it takes energy to make, however, you an entropy. And so if you have it, and that is going way up, alcohol, 66, and it took a fucking kilowatt of energy to get down there. So that astounds me. Crisp drink. Now, to talk to you something about a little bit more hot is the author of the Food Lab and the Managing Culinary Result.
Hi, I'm Kenji Lopez-Alt. This is a very intimidating crowd because I'm usually not used to talking in front of so many nerds who are going to be able to call me out when I bullshit. Has anyone ever been to anything that I've talked at before? One. Okay. All right. Try. Yes. Okay. I'm trying to figure out how many jokes I can reuse. Okay, I'm talking about steak, and I am only taking 20 minutes to talk about this. Usually I take about an hour, and 20 minutes is a much shorter time, so I'll try and go fast. It means I can't even. I bought these new shoelaces today. They're yellow, and I put them in my shoes. I bought them basically so that I would have something to talk about, and now I can't even tell you about them. Steak. So this is not a steak. This is a prime rib. A prime rib is a muscle that comes out of the cow. Well, it's a section of a couple different muscles that come out of the cow. The main one is this longissimus dorsi, which is like the one that runs down here. Those muscles tend to be very tender because the steer doesn't use those muscles very much to move around, to walk around, the way that it uses its shoulders and its haunches. They tend to be very tender, and that's why they're generally prized for expensive roasts and for steaks and things like that. This is a prime rib, which is essentially just like a very long ribeye. It's like a bunch of ribeyes stacked together. So today I'm going to talk to you about some of the myths surrounding cooking steak. There tend to be a lot of myths around steak. There's a lot of myths about food in general that once you actually start testing things, you realize that a lot of these aren't true. I think the main reason that myths about steak exist is because, at least traditionally, men didn't cook that much at home, except for like a couple times a year when they would go out back and grill a steak. And men like to be right about things, and they like to play with nations for why you do things and why you might want to do things differently. A lot of chefs tell you to do this. They'll tell you it takes a lot of energy, right? And your pan, the pan that you're searing it in, and we're talking about pan-seared steaks right now, is essentially like a bucket for energy. What it does is it takes energy from the tap, which is your gas source, or maybe your electric coil, and it stores it. And then later on, you can put that energy to use. So where does that energy go when you're cooking a steak? Well, some of it goes to heating it up. Some of it goes to evaporation of surface moisture, and then some of it goes towards proportions of where that energy goes. I completely made this graph up, but it's about right. I also wrote evaporation instead of evaporation. but the point is, most people think initially that a lot of that energy goes to raising the temperature. In fact, like it's almost negligible. The temperature changes as long as your steak isn't frozen, as long as it's not going through a phase change. The amount of energy that it takes to raise the temperature of that steak is negligible, and we're talking about the surface compared to the amount of energy it takes to evaporate that moisture. About 50 times more energy to evaporate that moisture than it is to raise it from 0 to 1 degrees. So 0 to 100, like from freezing, 0 to 100 degrees Celsius takes about, someone will probably correct me on this, it's either 5 or 50, but it's some large factor greater to actually evaporate that energy, evaporate that moisture. And the thing is, you can't actually go through the Maillard grinding reaction until most of that surface moisture is evaporated, because that's sort of a cap. Like it prevents like those reactions hit temperature of it. It's actually the starting dryness of it. So if you really want to make your steak sear very well, rather than pulling it out beforehand and letting it warm up, what you really should be doing is letting it sit in your refrigerator uncovered for a couple of nights so that the surface can dry out. And that helps your steak brown much, much, much faster. The other point is that letting it rest at room temperature, it actually doesn't change the temperature that much. The surface of the steak will change, but as far as talking about how the internal temperature goes, if you have like a steak that's about 1.5 to 2 inches thick, like something that's like a nice substantial steak, even after several hours, the temperature only goes up by a few degrees, which is about like maybe 14 to 15% of the final temperature that you're trying to hit. So it really does almost nothing to take your steak out before searing it. Dry as more in the room. Okay, myth number 2. Everyone's heard this one: searing locks and juices. This is one of like those classic steak things. People say sear your steak to lock in the juices, and it'll make it juicier. And then so you start with a high temperature, and the idea is that your steak when it's cut out of those muscles, so that muscle, the fibers run lengthwise along the spine, and the steaks are cut out in sections like this. So basically, it's like you're taking a steak resembles sort of a big bundle of tubes and a series of tubes, and each one of them has juices in them, and so as you cook, those tubes squeeze out. They're made out of protein. The sheaths are made out of protein. As you heat them up, those protein sheaths heat up. They heat up from the outside in, obviously, because they're heating from the outside in. And so they end up squeezing out juices. And the idea is that if you sear one side of the steak, it's going to cauterize that surface so that juices can't be squeezed out from that surface once you flip it over. Anybody who's ever tried to cook a steak on a grill, you probably know this isn't true. You can sear a steak really well on one side, flip it over, let it sit there, and eventually what you see is that juices start bubbling up through that sealed surface. Searing meat does not really lock in juices, and a very simple way to prove this. So if you divide your steak cooking or your prime rib cooking into 2 different phases, the searing stage versus the phase where you're cooking more gently, trying to cook it through to the inside, what you find is that if you sear first and then gently cook afterwards, versus the opposite where you gently cook first and then sear at the end, what you'll find is that the one that is seared at the end actually ends up retaining more juices than the one that was seared at the beginning. The main reason for that is because when you sear at the end, the surface of the steak is dry. You're already warmer. Again, a negligible difference. The main thing is that it's already dry, so that it sears much faster. So you have a much smaller gradient of overcooked meat, between the center and the exterior of the steak. So you end up with fewer really contracted muscle fibers, which is what is really important in terms of how to cook the best steak at the end of this. So yeah, not true. Searing at the beginning generally actually produces less juicy results than searing at the end. Myth number 3, bone-in steaks have more flavor. Another one that chefs will tell you all the time: always get your meat bone-in because it'll be more flavorful. This one never really made that much sense to me because, to me it sounds like for this to work, a steak has to be some kind of like water balloon that's attached to a bone where all the meats are just kind of flowing freely in and out of all areas, and that's clearly not true. A steak is really, again, like a series of tubes, like a coaxial cable. It's like there's stuff here and it's kind of locked in place. So how does flavor from one section really get to the other? And it turns out, so the way that I tested this, so I cooked a bunch of prime ribs. The one on the left there, on your right, sorry, the one on the right is a prime rib in its natural state with the bone in. The one in the middle is a prime rib in which I cut out the bones and then tied them back together. And then finally the one in the end is a prime rib in which I cut out the bones and then put a sheet of aluminum foil in between and tied them back together. So presumably, the one in the middle and the one on the right side should taste relatively the same because you're in full contact. There's whatever is going to be flowing around before will be flowing around again. And then the one on the left should taste significantly less tasty because there isn't any kind of meat, any kind of flavor flowing from the bones to the meat. As it turns out, they all taste exactly the same. All of them taste exactly the same. The main thing that a bone does, it does two different things. So one of them is that it insulates relatively well. So if you were to compare a bone-in ribeye compared to a boneless ribeye, the boneless ribeye has more areas of overcooked meat. So if you taste that same section that used to be against the bone in the boneless ribeye versus the one that has the bone in, it tastes more cooked, and so therefore it's less juicy. So it does taste a little bit less juicy. It also, the bone also on it has a lot of sort of connective tissue. So those bones have a lot of that fat around them, so they're tasty to chew on. But also, I think this makes you feel cool, like it's like a badass thing to do, cook a steak with a big bone. So yeah, no flavor exchange. Myth number 4: flipping your steak. And this is one that this is probably the first one I grew up knowing that, when I went on family barbecues, and I would go to my uncle's place in New Jersey, he would be at the grill and he'd be cooking the steaks, and I would come over and start poking at them because I was interested in fire, and he would tell me, no, don't touch the steaks, you can only flip them once in the middle, it makes them cook more evenly, it makes them taste better, blah blah blah. This one also super simple. All of these actually are pretty simple for you to debunk it yourself at home. If you take 2 steaks, grill them side by side, one flipping repeatedly, every 15-30 seconds or so, and one only flipping once in the middle, what you find is that the one that you flip repeatedly, not only does it brown just as well, it also cooks faster. It cooks about 30% faster. So that's internal the very center, the internal temperature. But it also cooks more evenly, so there's much less of this gradient. And by the way, I'm talking from the perspective of someone who thinks that the ideal steak is one that has very little gradient, that is perfectly medium rare from edge to center with a really nice crust on the outside. Some people like their steaks or their roast to have that sort of gradient where there's sort of overcooked crap on the outside and perfect meat in the center. I like my steak evenly cooked. I'm not sure how well. Yeah, it cooks pretty well. I think the one on the left there, you're right, was one that was flipped repeatedly. The one closer to me was one that was only flipped once during cooking. And you can see pretty clearly the one that was flipped once during cooking has that much thicker gray band of meat. This one, I honestly think the reason that this myth started was because in restaurants and in steakhouses, it makes a lot more sense to flip steaks only once because they're operating under a very different set of parameters than what you're operating under when you're cooking a steak at home. At home, you're cooking probably maybe 4, maybe at most like 8 to 12 steaks at a time. At a restaurant, at a steakhouse, you're cooking like 40 steaks at a time. You're cooking them all at once. You're cooking them throughout the course of the night, and so it makes much more sense to sort of line them up on your grill, keep track of which one has been cooked how long by flipping them once, and that's sort of a visual indication. At home, you're not constricted by that. You can flip them as many times as you want, and it turns out that it's actually better for you. Like those fidgety grill cooks, the ones who just like constantly have to peek at things, they turn out to make better steaks than the ones who are really Although it should be said that that no matter whether you know this or not, like the person who's at the grill with the fire, like in the knife within reach is the one who's doing it right, like that. Just challenge people, but not when they have fire. Okay, salt. Seasoning your steak. When do you season your meat? Salt does a number of things to meat. One of them is flavor. It makes us taste things without, like food without salt is relatively bland. And of course we can build up salt. Like I like really salty food because I've destroyed my taste buds by being a cook. But saltless food does not taste good. So you do have to season your steak at some point, but the question is, when do you season it? Do you season it just before cooking? Some people will tell you that it will toughen up the meat. Some people tell you to only season after cooking. What I found by testing this is that, salting does more than just flavor. Salting will actually affect the yes, characteristics. Yeah, will actually affect the physical characteristics of the meat. The salt, what it does initially when you salt a piece of meat, it'll start by drawing out moisture through osmosis. It'll pull water out from within the cells, and then it'll start dissolving within that liquid, and then it forms a sort of super concentrated brine that sort of glistens on the surface of the steak. And you can see this. You just salt a piece of meat, like whether it's chicken, pork, steak, whatever. Let it sit, and you'll see droplets of water start pulling up through osmosis, and the surface will look wet. Eventually, what happens is that salt dissolves a muscle protein, the myosin. It dissolves that protein, and what it actually does is it causes those muscle fibers to sort of loosen up, so that not only do they reabsorb the liquid that was initially pulled out with the salt, but they also pull that salt in with them. And so the salt, through this process, the salt slowly works its way down into the meat. This has a number of effects. So first of all, it obviously seasons the meat more deeply. The salt will get drawn into the meat, but it can also change the texture of the meat. So in extreme cases, like something like a ham, you've tasted the difference between like a pork chop and a ham. Mainly that difference is due to salt. A ham has been cured for a long time. The salt has been allowed to completely penetrate it, and it very greatly affects the texture of the meat, so that it doesn't lose a lot of moisture as it cooks, which is why a ham just naturally tastes juicier. It also obviously has a different flavor. With something like a steak, you don't want it to get that ham-like texture, so you don't want to cure it and let it sit. It ends up tasting like corned beef. You don't want to let it sit there for a long time. But letting it sit there for long enough that that surface moisture that the salt initially draws out gets sucked back into the steak, and so the salt kind of works its way down in. What that does is it allows you to sear a steak, but because it doesn't lose its moisture as readily, you'll brown it, but it will still be juicier inside, and it'll also be more well seasoned. So my advice is always to season a steak at least 45 minutes in advance, up to a day in advance. Either that, or if you have no time at all and you're really in a rush to eat steak, then season it like just before you start to cook it, because you don't want to sear it to evaporate that moisture. All right, so using a fork to flip your steaks. I've worked at restaurants where they forbid every kind of utensil other than spatulas and fingers. So no tongs, no forks, nothing. The more you're going to mess it up. By poking a steak, you're going to end up puncturing it. Again, this goes back to that idea that like a steak is a water balloon, but it's not. A steak is not a water balloon. Imagine if our muscles were water balloons, like, and we got little pinpricks, and all of a sudden we just started leaking out. Like that's sort of the idea that people have when you poke a steak with a fork. It's just all going to leak all of its juices. It doesn't. So I did this experiment where they took a bunch of steaks. And we forked them, both before cooking and during cooking. And we got up to around, so we had a 4-pronged fork, and we got up to 64 hits with a 4-pronged fork, so like 256 4-prong size holes in the steak before people actually started noticing that it was significantly less juicy. That was for 1 pound steak. Before they started noticing that it was significantly less juicy. The main reason is that I don't know if anyone does woodworking here. I recently got into woodworking. If you're trying to screw into a piece of wood, it's always much more difficult to get a grip when you're screwing into the end grain, because what you're doing is you're kind of pushing the fibers apart, as opposed to actually screwing into it and really tearing into those fibers. It's the same with a steak. Like if you have your steak cut and it's in a pan, that grain is running top to bottom, and so when you stick your fork into it, you're kind of pushing the muscle fibers apart, but you're not actually rupturing them. So you don't really lose much meat, really lose much juice. And by the same token. By the same token, it's okay if you don't have a thermometer with you. It's okay to like cut into a steak and peek inside, because you're losing some of the juices from the few fibers that you cut, but the bulk of this is not a water balloon. The bulk of the steak is still going to be exactly the same as if you hadn't cut into it. So finally, the best way to tell how a steak is done is by poking it. And this one I see all the time by like super famous chefs. And part of the problem is that it's done by super famous chefs, and chefs are not normal humans. Chefs work in restaurants. Chefs like cook the same thing over and over all the time. Chefs have this experience, and so so for a chef, you kind of have this the same product day after day after day, and you're cooking it all the time. You get this frame of reference where it's like, okay, that's medium well. For most people, you're buying it from a different butcher each time. You're probably only cooking a few steaks a year. You're never ever going to get that frame of reference. So really. The way to tell that a steak is done is with a thermometer because 160 degrees is 160 degrees. I mean, 160 degrees, I hope nobody cooks their steak at 160 degrees. But it's the same. No matter what kind of meat you have, no matter what day you're cooking it on, no matter how firm your cheek is, 160 degrees is well done. And so that's a thermometer is what you should be using to cook your steak. So the question is, what is the best way to cook a steak? There are a few ways to do this. So traditional high heat cooking. This is the way that they do it in steakhouses, where they have really hot broilers. You're starting with a steak that's pulled out of the fridge, and you're trying to get it to the table in as little amount of time as possible. And it takes a fairly large amount of time. A steak, especially like a well-marbled American steak that has a lot of fat in it, it's a very poor conductor of heat. So it takes a long time for that heat to reach the center of the steak, no matter how hot you're cooking it at least within reason. And so when you cook the traditional way, which is with very, very high heat, you end up with this huge gradient where the center of the meat might be medium rare, but you end up with these layers of overcooked steak on the outside. And so for me, like high heat cooking is not the way to do it. Flipping multiple times helps mitigate this, but it's not the best way to do it. For me, I recommend two methods. So there's the reverse sear, and that's where you start the steak without searing it, and you start it in a relatively low temperature oven, or if you're going on a grill, you start it on the cooler side of the grill. It takes longer. It'll probably, like with a regular like inch and a half thick steak, it'll probably take you about half an hour to 45 minutes, depending on the temperature of the oven or your grill, for it to cook through. But you get a much more even cook than you would if you tried to do it the hot way the whole time. So you start it at a low temperature, finish at high temperature. And this idea basically all developed out of the idea of sous vide cooking, which was something I was introduced to probably in the early mid 2000s when I was still at restaurants, and it's much more popular. Back then we were using lab equipment. It was thousands of dollars for a sous vide cooker. These days you can get one for like $150, $200. They maybe don't last as long, but it's a good introduction, a good way to get into it. Sous vide cooking, the idea is that you're cooking in a water bath that's circulated and held at a very precise temperature. So, medium rare steak is 125, 130 degrees, and that's it. So if you keep the water at that temperature all the time and you cook your meat in these vacuum sealed bags, you're never able to overcook your steak. It will always be medium rare, no matter how long you keep it in there. And so the idea is that you cook it in the water bath, and then at the end you sear it. It's sort of like reverse sear taken to the extreme, or actually, honestly, it's the other way around. Reverse sear is sort of like poor man's sous vide. The question sort of remains, once you're done with that, what's the best way to sear it? So searing, the idea is that you want to brown the exterior as fast as possible. You want to get a lot of those Maillard reactions. You want to get the texture that comes with dehydrated meat. And you want to do that all without overcooking anything on the inside. So the idea is that you're trying to deliver heat relatively fast. We're going to skip this one. So one way is to use the pan. This is the bucket. I got the bucket of heat. I'm going to pour it onto the steak, and I'm going to sear it very fast. It works relatively well. The thicker the pan you have, the better, because it'll hold on to more heat. A better way to do it is to combine it with flames. So multiple heat sources. We're pumping a ton of energy into there. This is a Searsol, which is like just an attachment, basically like a handheld broiler that you attach onto the end of a propane torch. This one works very, very well. In fact, this is what I do most of the time at home. And so once you have that really good steak, then the final question is whether you rest it or not. And there's some debate on this. So the idea with resting meat is that you're waiting. No matter how carefully you cook it, there's going to be some kind of temperature gradient built into the inside of that steak. And so you're waiting for that to basically equilibrialize, whatever the word is. You know what I mean. You want to let it even out. so that you don't end up with really hot sections where the juices are really, really sort of liquidy, because then if you cut it open, they flow out. So you want it to cool down a little bit. You want it to become even, and that way the juices come out when they're in your mouth instead of when you cut it open. So that's why you rest. But the problem with resting is that you lose some of that like really hard crust that you got on that sort of textural contrast, which is really important for us when we're tasting things. We like French fries that are crunchy on the outside and soggy in the middle, which is why we hate In-N-Out French fries, I think. We like that contrast. And so the question is, how do you get your steak to have that contrast while also retaining all of its juices? So I use this technique I call it the double sear, which is just like the internet-friendly way of saying that you re-crisp it at the end. So if you're pan searing, I'll save all of the juices, like all of the rendered fat that came out of the steak, all the oil, all the butter that was in the pan, leave it in that pan, let your steak rest, then reheat that oil until it's like sizzling hot, and pour it over the steaks. You'll see it like do this like bubbly thing. The steak will get really crispy on the outside again, and it's perfect. If you're doing it on a grill, let it rest. Throw it over the hot side of the grill for 5 seconds just before you serve it, and you'll get the same thing. And so when you do a steak like that, you end up with, that, which I think, to my eye, that's like a perfectly cooked steak. Like medium rare, all over the edge, very little overcooked meat, and then a really nice crust on the outside. And so that's normally the end of what I was going to talk about. But a couple weeks ago, I got the opportunity to work with the folks at Tested.com, where a lot of them we're going to hear from soon. And so we had this question where the question was, what is the best way to sear a steak, and is there such thing as too hot for after you've cooked a steak sous vide? Because in your head you might think, all right, the hotter I get, the faster I can build that crust, the less overcooked meat underneath. But the question was, what is too hot? And so we cooked a bunch of steaks sous vide, all to the same temperature, all cut from the same steer, and then we seared them using various methods. So we seared them using a grill, we seared them directly over a charcoal chimney, which is significantly hotter. We seared them using a searzall, and then we seared them using an aluminum forge, which gets up to 1200 degrees. It's not that useful to think of things in terms of air temperature, because there are other means of heat transfer that can brown things. I just wanted, the video's coming out on Thursday, and I just wanted to give you a quick sneak peek of what we were doing.
All right, we're in Kenji's backyard. We're going to cook a steak on an aluminum fork. This is like 12 or 1300 degrees Fahrenheit.
Go fast. I think. You got the timer? So this was already cooked sous vide.
1 second. 3 seconds. 5 seconds.
We'll flip it after 10.
Yeah, 7, 8, 9, and go for it. Look at that! That is amazing!
That is fast.
That is like a perfect grill in 10 seconds. All you need is a aluminum foil. Yeah, 23 seconds.
All right.
It's by far the fastest I've ever seen.
By the way, wearing open-toe shoes when working with video, of course, not recommended.
I did see that, and I really liked that experiment. I really liked that. We're at 39 seconds.
Okay. I think we're probably good.
You gonna do the edges?
Yeah, we'll do the edges done.
Awesome. Dude. 55 seconds, and we're pretty much almost there.
Done, I think, yeah.
We're done. 55 seconds, man.
Here we go.
1 minute flat. Really? Let's try that.
Yeah. Okay, so this video, the full version of this coming out on Tested.com on Thursday. Just a spoiler, this one did not taste very good. But it was pretty fucking awesome to make. And I think that's it. I guess, yeah, I'll take questions, I guess. Oh, I think I'll be back with signing books later as well. Yeah. Okay, so you go to a restaurant, you order a steak, and you never know what kind of steak you're going to get. Oh, okay, as far as how well it's cooked. Okay, so if you say medium rare, different restaurants interpret that different ways. Yeah, there's no good answer for this. You can hand the waiter a thermometer and tell him, can you cook my steak to 127 degrees, and that might help. The real answer is just go to the restaurant, go to the restaurant that you like, and go there multiple times, and then eventually you start getting like free drinks and stuff if you do that. Do it. Yeah, okay, so the question is, when you're trying out a steak, if you don't have time to leave it in the fridge overnight on a rack, are there other ways that you can help dry it out if you just want to cook it immediately? So yes, paper towels, definitely. You definitely want to get it off as much, like multiple layers of paper towels, push as hard as you can, get as much surface moisture out of there as possible. The other thing, you know, if you have like a couple hours and a very patient friend, you can also just blow on it with a hairdryer, or maybe like a stand to let it sit there. But at the very least, paper towels, you definitely want to get as much moisture as possible.
Beef or all meat? Does this count for beef or all meat?
Oh, okay. Does this count for beef or all meat? This counts for, for all meat. I mean, anything you want to sear, water is going to prevent it from, or anything you want to brown, water is going to prevent that from, happening. So, yes, although there are some things, so for example, like a skin-on chicken, there's some reaction, so skin in particular, so the reaction that converts collagen into gelatin. So collagen is like is a protein that there's a lot of it in skin. It's very, very tough. To convert it into gelatin, which is very tender and tastes great, it's a reaction that requires water. So you'll find that if you take like a chicken skin or like a suckling pig or a turkey and you let them dry out too much, they'll actually just turn into leather. Like they'll never ever soften because there's not enough water for that reaction to take place. So definitely, like for all naked meats that you want to put a sear on, yes, you want to dry them out. But for things that have skin, a little bit of drying out is okay, but too much drying out can actually be trouble. Okay, so the claim is that there's something wrong with steak in the U.S. and that steak elsewhere is just better. I would guess are they French or Argentinian maybe? Yeah, I mean steak from country to country varies. So in the U.S., like most of our steers are raised on grain. Even the grass-fed ones are. Well, in fact, almost all steers live most of their life on grass. And in the U.S., they're mostly grain finished. And the idea there is that you feed them this like. It's basically like them eating just breakfast cereal all the time. Like they get really fat really fast and build up a lot of this intramuscular fat. And like I said, like a lot of the distinctive flavors in meat comes from the fat. And so in the U.S., like because we've had grain-fed steer for so long, we've developed this taste for that extra fatty, really sort of luscious mouthfeel. In other countries, that's not the case. In other countries, the steers are raised 100% on grass. They're different breeds, and so they have less intramuscular fat. And so it's really a matter of taste. I don't think there's anything inferior or superior about one of the others. It's a matter of taste. One thing that you might want to note though is that depending on what kind of steak and the fat content of the steak that you're cooking, you'd want to cook it to different donenesses. So a lot of French people like their steaks like bleu, which is completely raw on the inside, like Philadelphia. What do they call it? Pittsburgh rare, where it's completely raw on the inside, seared on the outside. That works very well for very lean, generally grass-fed meat because lean muscle mass has a softer texture when it's completely raw, and we like that soft texture. But with really high-fat steaks, typically you want to cook it a little bit hotter because because when it's too cold, that fat has a texture sort of like candle wax, like you don't really want to bite into a candle, So beef fat in particular, like it doesn't melt at human body temperature, and so if you've ever tried to drink like a cup of pure beef tallow, you'll find that like it coats the inside of your mouth. So it makes it easy, I guess, to eat like chili peppers, but it's not a great texture. So for fattier meat, I tend to like to cook it to a higher temperature. How does a dry rub or marinade? So that's a very broad. How does a dry rub or marinade affect how you grill or cook meat? It's a very broad question because there's all different kinds of dry rubs and marinades. So typically a dry rub will contain a good amount of salt, and that will have the same effect as salting the meat. It'll help it retain more moisture. It'll season it more internally. Dry rubs also tend to have ingredients that brown much faster than beef protein does. So things like, I don't know, paprika or black pepper, they'll brown a lot faster than the actual meat does. So a dry rub can actually help your meat like get a darker crust faster. It'll obviously be a different tasting crust than just the meat itself. A marinade, that's an even broader subject because that depends on if your marinade is oil-based or if it has acid in it, how wet it is. Like all these different things can affect it. In general, marinades don't do much more than just give a sort of cursory surface treatment. When I was in college, I remember I had a friend who was going away for the weekend, and he sent an email out to like our whole house, and he was like, I have these turkey breasts that have been marinating in Italian dressing for the last week, so they're going to be super awesome and tender. Does anyone want them? And so I took them and I grilled them, and they were just like chalk, like terrible, terrible, terrible. And that's because the acid in the marinade will break down muscle proteins. But at the same time, they're also really bland. And so the point, like a marinade, like aromatic compounds in marinades are generally very large organic compounds. They don't work their way into meat very easily. The salt is a small molecule; it gets in there pretty fast. And so, yeah, like a marinade, I tend to only marinate for maybe like 4 to 12 hours at most. And then what I'll usually do is I'll save part of that marinade to reapply to the meat after it's cooked, and specifically after it's sliced, so that you can get that flavor full coating all over the whole meat instead of just on the surface. Last question.
How many steaks do you have to get to all that?
Say again?
How many steaks do you have to prepare?
How many steaks did I have to prepare to get to that one? Well, I started that one knowing how to do it, so it was just the one. I guess over the course of writing the book, I probably mentioned it in the book, but off the top of my head, it must be. I must have done like at least like 100 different tests, like on that order of magnitude. I can't tell you the exact number off the top of my head, but on that order of magnitude. And of course, like that's not counting like working in restaurants and doing like just general experience that you build up on, but actual ones where I wrote down what I was doing and kept track and like real science tests, probably on the order of 100 or so. I think that was the last question. Thank you so much.
So Benji is signing books at the book seat table in the back. This is your last chance to grab a grilled cheese sandwich. Nearer to your last chance to grab a robotic cocktail. We'll be back at 10 at 9:45 with a talk about shitty robots. Oh, also, if you have built a shitty robot and think that you could win the contest, bring it up on stage sometime during the break, and we'll line you up.
through those valves on the front, and you can see that it's kind of like tacked together really poorly. And what happened was there was an electrical noise issue, and about every 4 minutes it would trigger, and the whole robot would open all of the valves and just like pee itself. And it was the funniest thing. So we lost so hard that they gave us honorable mention. So that was a great robot. And we decided maybe time to make it a little bit more robust. So we did get some excellent critical acclaim from that competition. This is the Daily Dot, which featured a full write-up. You can read it on that competition, which is now 2 years ago. I would like to say, this is what they said about it. 4 of the machines, 4 of the machine's spouts start spontaneously pouring into nothing. It was exactly the peeing problem we had. It's not the first or last time alcohol will be spilled by robots this night. That's true. And then suddenly another member of the inebriated team steps into view, sipping a test drink he's made to see if the bot's bitters valve is functioning. Oh God, ugh. It tastes like punishment. Truth, it did. That, I think, might have been me. So we said, we can make this better, let's do it. We put together an all-aluminum frame. I welded it myself, and if you look at the welds, I'm really sorry. It's not very well done, but you can see there's still some things there that were there before. The little chuck that scoots back and forth, that's from the original wooden robot. I noticed the garage, not as clean. We had to epoxy those polycarbonate panels in because we kept blowing them out the front. Even though it only pressurizes to about 1 psi, if you have 1,000 square inches, that's 1,000 pounds. And so it's really trying to get you. So we epoxied it all in there, and that's why it looks like we use marine grade epoxy, because it turns out West Marine is the only place you can buy 40 ounces of epoxy. And so we did. Here it is, and this you will begin to recognize. This looks kind of like what we have now. You'll notice there's no valves on the front, but we're getting there. And there's the bottle of shitty coffee liqueur that's still in my garage from the first year competition when they wouldn't take it back. So if you want shitty coffee liqueur. Now, there's a lot of stuff that didn't work. The website that we first had, top left there, we built an ice maker using Peltier coolers and computer heat sinks. That thing could munch through power like you would not believe, and it could chill something about that big, make an ice cube in 90 seconds. And we said, that's probably not enough. In the bottom right is our newest failure. It was supposed to be working this evening. It's a cup dispenser, and it's got these pneumatic cylinders that face down. The only way to get them all to fire at the same speed was to open the flow controls all the way. So it slams down so violently that it just destroys everything in its path. So the cup slammer is not here tonight, but it's really, really entertaining. We're retrofitting it for paddle on the inside, so it slams into the drink, spins up to, 10,000 RPM, spins back down again, and then retracts. It didn't quite work well enough to have it here tonight, but if you come to the DNA Lounge on the 10th, we're competing again, and hopefully it'll be working by then. We'll see. So, last year we went to that competition with the robot, basically that you see before you tonight, minus the ice vendor, which we did not have at the time, and we won. We received much better. It made cocktails. It didn't pee itself the whole night. We were very proud of it. Potty trained, ready to go. It was great because this year it did not make a judge. So we have a random cocktail function, and it is really, truly random. It made a judge vodka, simple syrup, and Angostura bitters, thinking that it was like a Manhattan, but like a little different. And it was really gross. And so that was the honorable mention we got. So this one won. We got first prize, which was awesome. And then we put the robot in the garage for 6 months. And came back, put it all together for this thing again, as we're kind of ramping up for the next competition. So come and see us at the DNA Lounge. It'll be on Sunday, the 10th of July, coming up. We are, it's built right here in the East Bay, though we have a Pan Bay Area team. And so I guess the conclusion is build your dream robot, even if it pisses itself. So, without further ado, please join me in giving a hand to Simone Yachts. There we go, I got it, I think.
You really know me. He gave me a plastic hand. How great is that? It's a right hand. Oh, never mind. I always just find left hands. No, I always find right hands, so this wasn't that original after all. Hello. My name is Simone Yach, and I'm going to talk about the importance of building useless things, or at least why it has been very important to me. And I'm going to start with a story from when I was 8 years old, and I was this really happy, cheerful kid. And I had an idea that I wanted to build a robot, but I had never built a robot before, so I didn't know how to do it. But the way I went on about it was that I got a block of wood, and I drilled a hole through it. And then I put a stick through the hole. And the way this was a robot, brace yourselves, the way this was a robot was that if you wiggled one end of the stick, the other end would move too. And I was like, it's alive! And I know what you're all thinking. You're like, God damn, this girl's a genius. Somebody should throw a ton of money at her. But becoming a somewhat adult and looking back at my wooden robot, I realized that it's not really great. It's pretty terrible. I don't think it even qualifies as a robot. But I realized that that's one of the biggest differences between building things as a kid and building things as a grown-up. That when you're building things as a kid, nobody really expects you to build useful things. But so since I was